Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the first panel in the Digital and Data stream at Interchange. I'm Janet White, and I'm the Data and AI lead in Deloitte, looking after public sector transportation, and I'm your moderator today for this panel to talk about driving innovation in transport through AI and data. I'm very thrilled to be joined by esteemed panelists. I will do some setting up. I will introduce them, do some setting up, and then I'll be asking some questions. And when I ask the panelists question, I'll ask them to talk a little bit about themselves as well and their history. And then hopefully we will have time for questions at the end. So today I've got Caroline with me, who is the Head of Data Engineering and Transport for Wales, Ian Gordon, who looks after EMEA AI and Data for Arab, Catherine Williamson, who is the CDO for Department of Transport, and Cameron Ashraf, who is the Head of Digital Labs from National Highways. So before we get into our discussion topics, I'd like to do some setting up. We have spent a century building physical assets, bridges, roads, lots and lots of tarmac, and including rail, of course. And in 2026, the frontier is no longer about building more. It's about embedding intelligence into what we've already got. And the source of this intelligence is technology. It's about the data as well as technical code, maybe augmented intelligence, specific choice of words there, as opposed to artificial intelligence replacing people. So let's talk about data. A lot of the times, there's references to data as the new oil. I think that's really outdated. Today, I think data is more like renewable energy. The more we integrate, the more we share, and the more we reuse, the more powerful the data becomes. And let's talk about intelligence. Intelligence is about, these days, is about the coding, the machine learning that helps us to exploit the data. And when applied, it becomes far more powerful. But what about innovation? Innovation is very often mistaken as invention and pure invention. But I'd like to define innovation as three things. One is one A and one B, I guess. One is it can be pure invention, but it can also be taking existing applications and solutions into a new context, and we'll cover some of that later on today. The second thing, though, which is more important, is actually taking the innovative ideas and apply them and implement them, and then finally driving value from them. So for me, innovation is taking ideas, be it brand new or existing, applying into implementation and driving value. So what's the opportunity here? There is significant investment already in AI, artificial or augmented intelligence, and into data. And the DfT's Transport AI Action Plan defines or aims to embed responsible AI into every corner of our transport system in over 30 priority areas. There is significant investment, and the government has committed to investing or becoming the first customer for £100 million worth of AI into the UK economy. And the government has already invested 32 million into, for example, rail solutions to improve efficiency, drive infrastructure benefits, as well as making sure that we can reduce the emissions. And finally, transport is ahead of the game. A latest ONS survey says that 29% of us trust government AI, but for transport, it's 35%, so fantastic. So here's a provocation for today. The challenge that we have today is not about the lack of data or technology or investment. It is the innovation gap. It is about taking AI data and implementing them to drive value. And finally, a final bit of statistics, 11% of organizations are providing 80% of their employees with AI tools, but only 60% of these employees are actually actively using them. So adoption, implementation is a key risk. So the key questions are, how do we embed intelligence into our physical infrastructure? What needs to change to make it happen and drive safety and build trust with our citizens? And what can we learn from other industries and other nations? So I'm going to start questions for the panel. Catherine, shall I start with you?
Yep.
Okay. So let's talk about scaling and the scaling challenge. Innovation only delivers value at scale. Is DFT's role purely an enabler of the use of AI and data, or is the DFT chief architect of a national data ecosystem? And how do we stop pockets of excellence from becoming silos and not leveraged at scale? Would you like to also talk a bit about your history experience before answering the question?
Yeah, sure. Hello, everybody. My name's Catherine Williamson. I'm the Chief Data Officer at the Department for Transport. I'm what you'd term a career civil servant. I've been in government over 20 years now, bouncing around different departments. And one thing I can say is the appetite for data at the moment is the highest it's ever been at the senior level, which is really great to see. At the moment in the Department for Transport, I lead a range of excellent teams covering everything from data policy and data innovation through the work of our soon-to-be-released data action plan. I have a data engineering team, so I'm working with Google on all the technical work that we do with data in the department. And I also have a crisis data response team. Anyone guess what they're working on right now? So I've got a broad range in the Department for Transport. And in terms of your questions, I think firstly, I don't think actually innovation has to necessarily be at scale to add value. I think there are loads of really good things being done at a local level, small scale, that are really adding value. So I don't think we should discount innovation if it is not big enough. If it adds value, if it changes things, if it works for the people that need it, crack on. I think the other thing with innovation is we focus an awful lot on what works and not enough on what hasn't worked. And I think we all have to be better and braver at saying when things don't work and sharing that. In terms of your questions around the role of the Department for Transport, do I see myself as a chief architect? No, I don't think I do. And the reason for that is that there is so much wonderful stuff being done in transport through bodies like National Highways at a local level, working with the private sector, that my job is not to be overall the top of that. I think my role is less about chief architect and more about chief engineer. And the reason I say chief engineer is because I think my role and the role of my team is about building the bridge between all the great things that are being done and how we can share that both in terms of actually sharing data, which we know has been a challenge for a long time, sharing learning, sharing expertise, connecting people up. The amount of times I sit even within the centre of the Department for Transport and go, do you know that person over there is trying to do exactly the same thing you're trying to do? Why don't you have a chat? And one of the great things about my role is being able to look across our fabulous, but let's face it, fragmented transport ecosystem and building those bridges, even within the Department for Transport, which I'm very fond of. But we have road on one floor, rail on another floor, aviation on another floor. We've got to get better at building those physical bridges. We can do that. We've been doing that for hundreds of years. We need to get better at building those data bridges, talking to each other, collaboration, sharing information. So I think my role is that engineering piece, not the architecture.
Fantastic. So we're looking at Department for Transport as building virtual bridges and as an integrator,
Yep.
bringing different organizations together to drive greater good for data. Any other observations from the other panelists on this question? Discussion?
Well, I'm just going to say, your reference to sort of the engineering piece there and architecture. So I'll do a bit of an intro, probably relevant, rather than I carry on speaking. I'm Caroline Barnett-Phillips, Head of Data Engineering at Transport for Wales. Been with Transport for Wales for a year, actually, last week, and spent 12 years in financial services. And have come into Transport for Wales, and one of the big things that we're working on is actually how we bring data together, specifically working on an enterprise data platform and how we mobilize on our data strategy. And one of the things that I see around the architecture piece is actually how we create standards. And looking at the sort of standards and the sort of pockets that are around, I think there's a real opportunity of joining that up and enabling us all then to be able to communicate effectively with each other and to sort of and then produce products and services that are not necessarily just all of for what we deliver, but others can deliver as well. So it kind of opens up that kind of marketplace. So yeah, I think the engineering piece and bringing people together is kind of a real key thing that I'm keen to see more of.
And you've added another component there in terms of standards, creating standards so that data can become more interoperable and being able to be shared.
Yeah, absolutely. It's, I've been in banking, but I've also worked in manufacturing, lots of different industries. And one of the biggest problems is that kind of common language. And that's the one that sort of holds us back from innovating at the pace we want, and also holds us back actually in our use of AI.
Interesting. As you've got the mic, shall we move into learning from banking and maybe for transport to leapfrog banking? So as you said, you've joined from the banking world. What can we steal from the fintech playbook when it comes to data to integrate and then improve customer experience?
Yeah, so I think we've all experienced and have seen what's happened through the financial service sector over the years. Open banking started it all. And that was kind of really instrumental because before that, of course, banks communicated, but it was very much in a batch, very delayed process. And us as customers would wait days before we knew whether something was updated, what our transactions were. It was not very customer-centric, I think is how I'd put it. Then open banking came in, and that was a regulation. So it wasn't that the banks sort of were chomping at the bit to do this. This was regulation that drove it. And I think that's key. But it meant that everybody started communicating, and standards started to be created. They had to be, because you cannot communicate across platforms if you don't have a standard language. So, and reference. So that started, and once that had started, I think the opportunities and what that could deliver for customers became much more evident. And us as customers demanded more, because now we could see our financial services, our products in more places, and we wanted to actually link them together. So it drove the need for foundations around data. And I think from a transport perspective, lots is being put in place. And I think that's the bit that we're at that point now of how do we start using what banking has done? How do we make sure we have the foundations in place? Because actually we can learn from banking. We need standard classifications, APIs. They are, and I used to sort of joke about this in Lloyd's around, it's a quick way of showing customers your errors. And so it is incredibly important that we built, put in data governance, that we had data management practices, data ownership, all of those sort of core foundational blocks that I think that we've got pockets within transport, and especially around safety. I mean, that is massively covered. I think it's how we take that further and start looking at how do we join up for customer journeys. So banks started thinking about customer journeys and focusing and process mapping all of that and that kind of system view of it. And for me, that's that kind of customer-centric view that a lot of us are looking to do is the way that we start opening up our data, that we start enabling integration, that we have customers that then they can see their journey, their history, they can move between modes of transport. Transport for Wales, one of our missions is around sort of one timetable, one ticket, one network. And that's, to me, that's that multimodal view that we all as customers and passengers want. We want to know what is, happening on our next part of our journey so that we then can either take a change or we carry on and we know we'll get there in confidence. And I think that the background in terms of what banking did and still does helps us create that structure that we can then work on and exploit.
And perhaps banking provides us with a roadmap of how that could happen. And I'm really interested in your comment about multimodal and having that customer view, because we are organised, obviously regionally. We're starting to see the combination of the different modes coming together, managed under one governance, which really helps with the passenger journey perspective. But I think, again, coming into we travel across multiple regions. So I think there's still some work in joining up the different regions, creating standards across the nation in the transport network, and making sure that our journeys are seamless and protected. Any thoughts on maybe leapfrogging, banking?
I can share some thoughts. So Cameron Ashraf, Head of Digital Lab at National Highways. Digital Lab is effectively 4 teams into one. So there's a data science AI team, there's a geospatial team, there is a digital partnerships team because we've released our data sets to the public and we have a roadmap to do more. And then recently we've added in a test center in the middle of the country, which is currently called Development Center, but we're going to evolve it towards being a technology innovation campus as we go forward. The reason I think Janet's looking at me is I've got 26 years of experience in financial services. I'm always wary about taking another sector as a benchmark. Having moved from financial services to transport, financial services is an incredibly simple sector. It has no geospatial at all, whereas everything you do in transport has a geospatial element always. So you need to know where the asset is it above ground, below ground, what is it connected to, how does it get power, et cetera, et cetera. Whereas in financial services, it's a lot simpler. But I do think the point you made about customer centricity has been driven in brutally, and fintech emerging to cherry pick profitable customers has made that even more intense, the fight for the customer and customer's attention. That's, I think, something that we could take on board more. The challenge, I think, for us is more, and apologies, it's not going to sound nice, I think we get in our own way. So we, as an industry, have certain structures which have certain incentives structurally built in. What do I mean? In highways, we manage the A roads and the M roads. That is our mandate. And therefore, all of our procurement is to make sure that is the best M roads, A roads that we can possibly give to our customers. There isn't something in there about being collaborative and about exchanging information and so on and so on. If financial services were truly looking after their customer, then they would probably also want to get health data, because your health is strongly connected to your wealth. I can't see many financial organizations having very good health data, because they wouldn't know what to do with that very different data set and being able to then come up with a proposition that they could take to market. So I think there are structural issues that we should just not ignore, but we should, as you said, start building virtual bridges that accept that these are the barriers. Procurement is the first one, my personal opinion. Not that procurement people are bad people. Procurement people are good people. However, if your procurement has a specific deliverable and milestone to achieve, then that's what you do. You don't then tend to say, I'll invent a few more deliverables because I've got good friends in DFT that need some help, or someone in aviation. I think the second thing that we do, which we get in our way, is I think we make it very difficult for the people that we employ to demonstrate their talent and take risk. Mm-hmm. I think once you start working in transport, and one of Highway's top values and imperatives is safety and the reduction of killed and seriously injured on the network, depending on how you position that in your team's mind, you can get ultra conservative, and therefore everything is emergency and everything is safety and so on, versus what is a balanced risk approach, which in banking, that's what you have to take. You have to take a balanced risk approach as to how can you ensure growth, but with a risk mindset. I think there are certain places where we just don't get that right, and we then adopt the most conservative and the most over-governed view of what safety means, as opposed to what is the customer truly getting as an experience. Last thing. In the police network, it's the same in one sense as well. So in the police, if you divide the police into certain regions, why would they care whether there was a gang running across different regions if their metrics are about the area that they govern? So similar to the way we work in transport, we need to figure out better partnership approaches, which is what I think my team does really well. Better partnership approaches to then say, actually, within what we have as a mandate, these are win-wins. It doesn't mean we're going out of governance. It doesn't mean we need to procure differently. It just means we can have the right conversation where we can both benefit from the investment.
Fantastic. So we need to learn from banking. We recognise that the industries are different and transport's potentially more complicated, but banking's also highly regulated as well. So learning from the pitfalls and the differences is also a good way of figuring out how we can leapfrog. Cameron, I'll still talk to you about innovating at speed with safety and trust. You've already spoken about maybe taking more risks, maybe working better together. Give me an example of how Highways has delivered innovation.
Thank you. So I've introduced myself already. You won't do that twice. I would say that depending on how you classify innovation, so as you mentioned earlier, APIs have been around for 10, 15 years. They're a known technique to share data, and externally, internally. we decided to run a program called Digital for Customer. Digital for Customer was about delivering data services to outside of our organization for the first time. Why is that innovative? Because it's, one, it's not what we do. Two, it's taking a belief that within your organization, you don't have all the talented people in the world. And the minute you admit there are more talented people outside your organization than inside your organization, what you're asking is for the talent of the people outside your organization who do things brilliantly to then demonstrate by you providing the ingredients for them to innovate. So it's a slightly different approach whereby it's not saying we're innovative, look at our products, look at what we achieve. It's saying, why don't we become a platform for innovation? And therefore, in the outside world, let's see whether these ingredients allow people to create things that we just couldn't have imagined. So as an example, one of the data services, we have a number of subscribers to those data services. One of them is called HasAlert. They're an organization that tries to notify drivers about where there's roadworks and people working on the network, which obviously if you're working on the network and you've got fast-moving vehicles on the side, it's incredibly dangerous for them. So their whole premise is to alert drivers in vehicle as to where these situations are so drivers can be more cautious, take more care. They've taken our data set. We had a partnerships team to explain why we're releasing it and then go through a process called Teach, Tailor, Take Control, whereby we taught them what we're trying to achieve. We tailored with them the proposition so it would make sense to their customers. And then we said, take control of the data, but just let us know if there's any impact. And to date, as I understand it, is about 19 million journeys have been notified. So 19 million journeys in the UK have been notified with highways data, but no one will ever see it. We will never get credit for it because it won't pop up saying, National Highways. Good. It should be seamless. And HasAlert should get all the credit they get, and people should then think of them as a great partner to distribute data to the customer.
Love hearing that example, which gives us the full end-to-end of innovation, implementation, and delivering value. So thank you for that. Ian, let's come to you next. And let's look at the global edge. So you work across EMEA. I'll let you introduce yourself a little bit more, but you see firsthand how other nations are embedding intelligence into their transport network. So, what are the pitfalls? Who's getting it right? Who's not? And what lessons can we learn?
It's a risky gambit, trying to speak on behalf of the entire world, but I'll give it a go. So I'm Ian, Data and AI lead in Arup. I've spent my career trying to work in as many different bits of infrastructure as possible. Over the last couple of years at Arup, I've been lucky enough to work on a range of transport projects. We've done a fair bit of work with Dubai's Road and Transport Authority, particularly amongst their control center team. Worked with Changi Airport. Recently, most importantly, getting to work for the DfT, leading their, it's an acronym, Crisis Response and Resilience Digital Twin, or CRDT to friends. And at the same time, also been lucky enough to work in the energy field with National Energy System Operators, data sharing infrastructure, and Great British Nuclear, and various other things like that. So in the lead up to this panel, I was reflecting on what have I learned in recent times, what's different working in data now than maybe 5 or 10 years ago, and reading some of the benchmarking that we've done around other major urban areas, London, Singapore, Shenzhen, Madrid most recently. I think the thing that really stood out to me, and it kind of ties into this conversation, is we're beginning to think of this as a system of systems. And I think the thing that really triggered in my brain when Caroline was talking was customer centricity. It's not a thing that we naturally do. I don't naturally do it. I get excited about bridges. I think bridges are beautiful unto themselves, irregardless of whether they're used for anything meaningful. And I think that's probably a kind of silo that we go down, is we become infrastructure focused rather than customer centric. So I've learned something today. It's a good start. what I'm really seeing with the customers we work with and with the wider benchmarking is this movement towards fusing these multiple data sources, creating that kind of common language and system of system view across infrastructure. I think what that gives us is a richer, more nuanced view of operations. I think it provides the underpinnings of AI. I think until you've done that kind of tying together, you do not have the prerequisites to AI. And there was a phrase that my colleague in Madrid used, which really stuck with me, which is, he said, closing the loop. So it's not just about bringing and fusing data from a variety of places so that you can have a really nice dashboard that's super much nicer than the previous dashboard. It's actually about making sure that you can get that information back into the actionable point of interfacing with the real world, changing things, painting a bridge, closing a bridge, whatever you happen to be doing with your bridges. And ultimately trying to create this sense of real-time intelligence. I used to work in the same team that Cameron's in National Highways. Back then, it was all about, let's get the data out of the source systems so that we can analyze it over time. And there's clearly still a role for that. That's still good, don't get me wrong. But now I hear that there's, from all the panelists here, this sense of like, let's get into the real time, let's get into intelligent decision-making, responding to the now, as it were. I think that's what we're trying to do with the DFT, is create an intelligent way of processing volumes of data and using the amazing computing power that we have access to simulate on a scale that would have been unimaginable 5 to 10 years. You know, we can simulate entire urban regions pretty much in real time using agent-based modeling. That still feels like science fiction to me, but it's not, it's a real thing. And then just finally, looking at my colleagues in Dubai and the RTA, what really came home to me in that project is if you're going to build this kind of integrated real-time intelligent control center that sits above all of the modes within an urban area, that's not a technology problem. You have to basically build from the ground up again. So you need to redefine your platforms, your processes, your people with real-time decision-making in mind. If you just try and jury-rig a whole bunch of real-time insight into the existing ways of working, all you're going to do is continue to blind people with lots and lots and lots of noise and not a whole lot of signal. So it's a thing I've learned working with Deloitte, to be honest, the importance of starting with the operating model, starting with the mechanisms that the organization's actually going to use to make decision-makings, and then working back from there to understand what interventions you can do from a technological and AI perspective to actually drive that decision-making process and close the loop, as it were. There you go.
Great. So the technology is there, the data's here for us to exploit. Caroline, you also mentioned making sure that there's governance, and I think you're referring to the governance for managing the data. Mm-hmm. And Ian, you nicely brought it into the broader context. It is about organization transformation. It is about change. Applying the technology and implementation means that we need to change many people's jobs to make that happen. Any thoughts on what Ian has just said from the rest of the panel?
Completely agree with what you've said. I don't think it is science fiction. I think we're there. Some of the stuff we can do is incredible. I think, though, those foundations are really, really key to making that happen. So data quality is something we here in the centre time and time again as being vital for making those operational decisions work. There's more coming on standards. Happy to have a chat with you about that, but there'll be more coming on standards. I think the other one, as we move into a space of more APIs for data sharing, is actually the importance of metadata. How many times have you heard people say, well, the metadata's in somebody's head, or it's in a Word document or a PDF buried at the back of whatever. We need to get better at exposing metadata as well as data. And I think the point you raised about geography is absolutely crucial to integrated transport. So often the fact that we have evolved our ecosystem with different modes and different geographies mean that actually we've not been as accurate about geography as we should have been. And that might have been okay when you were building large bridges. You can see it's a large bridge. Who cares if it's a few meters off on the map? Doesn't matter. As we move into a world of autonomous vehicles, things have to be really, really accurate to work. and the importance of getting those geographic standards right and getting the geography in the right place is a big, big challenge in transport, not one to be underestimated. The technology's there to help us, but it does mean in some cases we are going to have to go back to the drawing board and remap some things and make sure we truly know where that infrastructure is so that we can do that linking together. So those standards, those metadata, those geographic units are really, really fundamental so that we can then build forward and start to do the real-time ABM type stuff that you're describing. So a little plea to people just to not forget those fundamental parts.
Can I add something in?
Please.
Love what you said there. My head of geospatial would love it as well. He's on a constant mission to make sure it's top of the agenda. Just something to throw out to all of you. The reason I'm so behind what you've just said is, let's take just a really practical example of what we're trying to talk about for a customer, for you as an individual, anybody who drives, anybody who knows a driver, a bus driver, a coach driver, anything. Imagine they are using an app or an in-car system, navigation system. Imagine in front of them, they need to make a turn. But what if the voice command comes in 2 seconds later than the visual command? Does the brain then process it as, no, that was related to what I just saw 2 seconds ago, or not? And therefore, if you take the wrong turn into a wrong way road, a no entry road, a slip road that leads you down into a ravine because there's works, these are the practical things we're talking about. And the reason I use this example, because there are real examples I know of where this is true. So as part of our partnerships with the companies who are taking our data, we're very studious in working with them on when you're thinking about what you're trying to achieve, let's have a really good debate about the service design, about the data quality, about the messaging. Not that we know better than you, but our imperative is the safety imperative. Yours is safety plus also commercial success. But between the both of us having that conversation, we'll get to a better place. And the last thing we want is to provide data where people take shortcuts or say, well, that bit of data is really not relevant. And then what you find is on the road, when customers use that data, they're being pointed towards really hazardous, dangerous conditions of driving. So we are really, really doing our best in that partnership, developing of that partnership, to ensure that we have joint values and principles that we can abide by.
Thank you. Well, we've heard from our panelists on innovation at scale, building virtual bridges, looking at leapfrogging banking. Standards and governance are critically important. Love the customer journey perspective, making sure that we start with all of us who are traveling in mind, and driving innovation at speed and scale, and great example of where it's already happened. 19 million journeys impacted through openly sharing data from national highways. And Ian making sure that we look after the end-to-end. It's not just about the data or the technology, but we need to make sure that business change also happens. I'd like to open the floor for questions. We've got some time, which is fantastic. Adele, are you here? You've got the roaming mic. So anybody who's got a question for the panel, please put your hand up and Adele will come. I can't really see for the, oh, there's a question here, a couple here. One from the front.
Going first, isn't it? Chris Myers from Arup. I was kind of interested in the comparison with open banking. I think, Caroline, you said it happened because the regulator told people to do it, i.e. my sense was they're standing there with a big stick. Where, it doesn't necessarily have to be a stick or a regulator, but where's the incentive for transport to make those type of changes coming from? I think we heard from Cameron that you're not necessarily set up to be collaborative or do for other things for other parts of the industry. So where does the incentive come from?
I think the incentive actually comes from our sort of experience now around, I talk about customers. And to be honest, our customers, that's the incentive. They expect, we all expect to have a connected journey. We get frustrated when we don't know why something isn't on time, that we're sitting, waiting at a bus stop and then the bus doesn't appear at all. That's just my experience, obviously. But the more we inform our customers and keep them updated, then actually when things go wrong, which they will have an appreciation and they'll be focusing on how we dealt with it, not on that problem. And so then we can have our customers helping us, and a number of networks already do that. They go and travel with them and talk to groups and say, we're looking at these services, what does that mean for you? Just so we start having those wider conversations with the people who are using our networks. I think that for me is really key, that we sort of bring them in, and that's from all backgrounds, all experiences, all sort of needs and support, so that we fully know how people use our systems and our network, because I'm not sure we know that fully, and we have a view ourselves of what people want, and that's not necessarily what they do want. And banking learnt that quite quickly with the emergence of the fintechs and challenger banks.
Catherine, did you?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think technology is no longer the barrier, and expectations have changed around people, how they want to travel. People expect real-time information. They expect to be able to see on their phone what's actually going to happen. So I think that drives the behaviour change to a degree. I'd also say we're working with the Department of Business and Trade on smart data, which is looking very heavily at the lessons learned from banking and other sectors, and thinking about how that data exchange could help facilitate some of these things. And there is regulation in that space, so there might be things that we can do there. But it's all about those use cases. So where are we going to add value? Where is it useful to adopt the lessons learned from banking and others? There's no point just smushing everything together for the sake of it. As you say, you could have linked in the health data, but it doesn't add the value. So it's all about actually where's the value going to come from. If you've got a very strong use case, that's when you tend to find those barriers get broken down and you can start to take things forward.
Can I just build on what you just said? So this is transport, it's not financial services, but to give you some context. The development of contact, for those who are young, you'll have no idea what I'm talking about. Before contactless, you had to do a signature, and the signature was matched against the signature on your card to get the goods from the. I know you just looking at me like, what is that?
What?
In financial services, that was recognised by merchants, by retailers, as stopping the flow of the till, because you've got to take time to find the pen, you've got to do the signature and verify. So there was a real push on working with academics on what is a better way. And it was like, oh, you could put this little chip that does contactless. So all of a sudden, financial services developed in contactless as a single use case of faster going through the till. Someone incredibly smart then turned around and said, what's one of the worst experiences I have? It's actually TfL. Because at that time, there was no Oyster, there was nothing, and you had to literally queue up for a ticket or get some paper tickets a week in advance. It took financial services organizations about a decade of collaboration on standards to go from contactless to metros and TfL. And TfL is the shining light globally, but we don't talk about it much because we're British, of an incredible innovation which is now being adopted in nearly every national, major city in the world. But it took 10 years of roughly effort on standards of the complexity of a journey. It seems simple on the outside, you tap and go. underneath it is how many journeys does this person take in a day? Did they take just buses or buses plus train? Would that qualify them for an overall discount for the end of day travel card, or et cetera, et cetera? There's a lot of complexity underneath. That type of innovation takes hard work, but a clear use case as to we see the friction. If we can get rid of the friction, that would mean we move people faster around our network. We can then, so although we have built more tube lines, actually we've developed also faster, more capacity by having faster in and out of the stations and so on and so on. But all of that needs that foundational level of use case and applying that use case and what is that common standard. And I think financial services do that type of common standards really well, because no matter which card you have, it will work.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, panel. I'm Miranda Sharp. I work with Visual Meaning quite a lot. The case for integrated transport is well made. The value is already established. Who's going to pay the bill?
So integrated transport, everyone accepts is a thing that we want. Not me personally. I don't think anyone disagrees that it's a thing that we want. I will say there is more coming with our integrated national transport strategy that will set out more what we're going to do in this space. But equally, we'd like to hear from local areas about what they're doing and what works well. As I said, innovation doesn't just have to be scaled at the national level. There's loads of really good local things that are being done. TfL did lead the way. I remember being up here last year for the launch of the Bee Network. I've even got my bee earrings in to celebrate. Manchester now have an integrated network. They've done that more or less by themselves. So there's definitely more we can do. The strategy will be coming. And that will hopefully give you a little bit more about what's being done in that place. But please think about locally, actually what you can do to support integration and make things more people-centric.
There was a question back there, actually. Do you still have a question?
Can't see it back.
Hi, Joe Collis. I work for Amy. So I thought that was a great conversation, really interesting. I think what point I'd like to pick up on was, I think a couple of people mentioned sort of like data sharing standards, data quality. I thought, Cameron, it was really interesting how you were talking about the assurance process for the end output. I think I'd be really interested to hear more from the panel on their view of the role of assurance of the analytics coming from AI, particularly in sort of an engineering and safety critical context.
Not a hard question then.
It's very open. You can say what you want.
I think in this place, this is where government has really done a really thorough and good job. So you had Rishi Sunak investing in a lot of raising the awareness of what AI could do for the nation in terms of economic growth. So to cut to the chase, my team are working towards every piece of AI we do has to have an ATRS, Algorithmic Transparency Record Standard, I think it's called, meaning it is shareable with government what we've done according to a template that they can interpret and have overall governance of, is it the right thing for the UK? Is there a way that we should be sharing this with other bits of public sector, etc.? So I think that has made our life easier because it gives us a clear template to work towards. No matter what we're building, the ATRS has to be transparently done. It's also given a side benefit which government don't know about, which is when we get very slippery organizations who say they have got the best agent in the world, the best AI in the world, but we can't tell you because it's IP, we then say, but if you can't put it into ATRS, we're not going to work with you, because that's our first level, foundational level of transparency, so that we understand it's the right thing for the customer and you're able to demonstrate it's the right thing for the customer. At which point some organizations have then said, well, this is an impasse. And I've said, well, it's not an impasse. You've got great people like Deloitte and other really good organizations who could get auditors to review what that ATRS submission would be, and they could sign off on well, can't possibly share the IP with you, but this auditor has seen it, can verify it conforms with all those standards. So I think going forward, it's about it's transparency fundamentally, because you have to be able to explain it, and having a consistent way of sharing that explanation, which ATRS does really well. And I'm sure we'll innovate and improve it, but it just does it as a really good way.
Can I do an audience poll on ATRS? So who's aware of ATRS in the audience? So not that many. Oh, you're not audience.
I
but
know, I'm just
it's
going.
good. It's good that
I've been
you're
really-
aware of it.
Yeah.
And you're new into transport and public sector, so good. So I think there's something there for everyone here in terms of looking into ATRS and really understanding what guardrails that provide.
Yeah, I mean, it's the reason I was saying that is something that Welsh Government have also put out, obviously adopting, but there are slight variations sometimes with that, but it is around that transparency from an algorithmic perspective, and even going and sharing sort of models that perhaps aren't that complex as well, just to build up that kind of trust and visibility for the public to understand what it's being used for and what data is being used for. And I think that's a really big piece, which you know, a number of industries have to be mindful of, is that sort of perception of what it's being used for, the consent around data. And that's, again, something that, you know, regulated industries spent a lot of time working on. How do you know that was the last touch point from that customer that did the, I don't want to be emailed anymore, whereas 2 days before, that was fine. And we've probably got a bit of work to do around that, especially as we open up and integrate, that we are taking that consent and that kind of, well, that really important data, which is customer data that they've trusted us with, that we're treating it with the respect that people believe that we should do, and we protect it as we should. And I think the more we share what we're doing and how we're using it, it kind of opens it up, and then people do start consenting to having their data shared amongst different services if they can see the benefit of that. But we need to earn the trust first.
There might be a bit of a split to me between the sort of official regulated AI-driven decision-making and then the shadow AI-driven decision-making. I mean, I was really struck by some of the recent advertising from Microsoft, which basically shows two people arguing over a sales deal with their two co-pilot agents, both interpreting their different spreadsheets. And it's a convincing ad, but in terms of auditability and assurance, it paints a picture of rival black boxes arguing with each other that is completely out of step with what Cameron's been describing.
And therefore, is it up to organizations who kind of work with their supply chains to ask them for that transparency, like what you're doing in highways, to look for evidence in how AI is being used? More and more, I think, in my view, 100% of our technology that comes to us will be infused by AI. Some of it not transparently, and therefore, how do we get underneath that? And where do we draw the line as AI becomes ubiquitous in our technology? I think that's a really kind of big question there. I think we've got time for one more question.
Hello.
Just on the left.
Hi, Michał Wodyński, Wider Arcana. This question is inspired by your comment about the risk management and the fact that we can sometimes be over-conservative with health and safety. As a designer, I feel, from what you said, and it was super interesting, I have to say, the data could help us in like pre-procurement or even procurement period to reduce the risk and actually reduce the cost by identifying how to early on allow for maybe time constraints for the project to happen, maybe rerouting certain connections, make like a proper procurement planning prior to as a temporary works designer, for me, it's absolutely crucial. You know, I do have very, very short slots to procure a project. So how do you see that? It is also a cost saving, like a massive cost saving, because we can reduce, the risk would be reduced, isn't it? So.
I just want to tweak the first bit of your words. I'm not saying that we shouldn't be concerned about health and safety. Safety is the single most important thing in our organisation. It's a value, it's an imperative, and so on. What I'm trying to say is there's an over-governance of it. So as an example, by releasing the data services, we are now adopting a single standard for those data services. It's called GG 104. It's a safety standard that we've created in highways to ensure that we have had an excellent understanding of all the harm that was possible and what is our mitigation. Now that we've done GG 104, do I need then somebody else to do some insurance and to go to a committee for 12 people who don't know what we're doing to then do their own assurance and then another? So with assurance, this is going to sound like Spider-Man, with assurance, we should think about accountability. Because the more layers of governance you add in doesn't add in more accountability, it adds in more confusion as to where does the buck stop and who should be accountable. So if we develop a system, let's take CCTV as an example. If we use CCTV in a certain way to monitor wrong-way driving, then we should understand the accountability for all the supply chain and highways as to the decision-making process, not well, it wasn't my committee that signed it off. It was I had to go to this other committee who had to sign it off and so on. So I think what I'm trying to say is the over-governance is that where is the transparency on the accountability is what I would focus on. On your specific question, I would love if procurement would think about this is a procurement that is supporting this use case, this service. And therefore having the mindset of, actually, there's a suite of procurement going on here. What is it that should complement what's happened already? So it could be as easy as, and this sounds really easy, so apologies, a clause saying all data created should be machine readable and available to share within public sector. That sentence, although it's not definitive of how, would make huge inroads into the supply that's contracted to think about, oh, I need to deliver against that. So it needs to be machine readable, meaning AI is able to understand it and build modeling of it. It needs to be shareable. Okay, well, a PDF in my website that nobody can access is not going to work. So I think thinking about those types of things is really helpful. So the use case example that Catherine mentioned, but then thinking more holistically about this set of procurement is to support what service is this trying to deliver, and then thinking more horizontal about the clauses that should be involved. You're nodding.
Yeah, no,
Okay.
I completely agree.
Okay, thank you. On that note, I'd like to thank my panelists for bringing up all the very interesting topics that we've covered, and thank you for the audience for asking the questions as well. And I'd just like to close with the fact that intelligence using AI and data is a fundamental utility now. It's not a luxury anymore, and therefore we need to consider how we safely, carefully implement with transparency and integrity and deliver safe outcomes. It's a team sport. We need to play together. We need to integrate, build those bridges, and make sure that we are sharing our experiences as well as the data together. And we need to make sure that the end-to-end implementation is supported by transformation in the organization, developing operating models, and actually driving the change through so that we can deliver the benefits and value that's needed. We are going to be heading back to the Deloitte stand after this talk, so I know some of you still have questions. So please come and talk to us if you still have some questions. Thank you. Thank you.